Welcome everyone to episode 1 of Psyclonic. I'm your host, Jek Spacerunner. I'm going to go ahead and do a quick intro for the guests right now. Then we got a bunch of questions set up here, so should be a good time. Alrighty. Guy McPherson is a professor emeritus of natural resources and ecology and evolutionary biology at the University of Arizona. He received a PhD from Texas Tech University in 1987. Guy is known for discussing the quickly decaying conditions of our habitats on Earth, abrupt climate change, and near-term human extinction. Today, we'll be talking about the science behind the possibility of human life ending on Earth within our decade and how we might be able to respond to this news. So Guy, thanks for joining. I really appreciate you taking the time here. Is there anything else you'd like to add to that intro?
No, the pleasure's all mine. I look forward to our conversation.
Excellent. So first question, I think will help get some grounding for the listeners. How did you get into ecology and the environment, and why do you love being a teacher so much?
Yeah, so I grew up in a remote village in northern Idaho during the mid-1960s through the late 1970s. Because of the culture at that time and in that place, I was a free-range child in a rural location surrounded by forests and rivers. My parents took us, the three of us, hunting, fishing, hiking, and backpacking from an early age. In other words, I grew up in the wilds. Dark forests and fast-running streams and rivers were familiar and comfortable. They still are. Regarding the teaching part, my parents were educators who warned their three children not to pursue the same path they did. All three of us did exactly what they'd asked us not to do. We became educators. I blame my parents for modeling the practice of teaching and also for instilling in their three children a profound sense of intellectual curiosity. We were encouraged to read, and we all became avid readers. So there's plenty of blame to go around, but I'd say my personal history, especially my parents, probably started me down this path.
Great. So we're going to go ahead and jump into global warming and everything and try to get into some of the science today. So to start, to help people see past the common perspective of thinking that we're just these little humans, we couldn't possibly alter the ecology of the planet. The planet's just too big, it's not possible. I'll often tell them it's not the planet we're changing. It's a much smaller sliver of our habitat called the atmosphere. And if the Earth were the size of a beach ball, the atmosphere would be equivalent to a piece of paper laid over it. So 7.5 billion people in a post-industrial era can destroy that piece of paper. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. In fact, that's a great approach. A lot of things are lethal in small doses. Ask some of those deniers how they'd feel about ingesting just a small amount of strychnine, or pick any other poison. Sometimes small things matter. Greenhouse gases matter, even in concentrations that we consider to be quite small. That said, I would encourage you and anyone listening to this conversation to check out the Mere Reflection framework at merereflection.com. And MER in this case is spelled MEER because it has to do with the acronym that leads to the Mere Reflection Project. So it's MEERreflection.com. This framework is the brainchild of Dr. Ye Tao at Harvard University's Roland Institute. And in my opinion, this framework offers the only positive path forward. It alone gives us an opportunity to quickly reduce the overheating of Earth and therefore preserve habitat for humans and other organisms on this planet.
Great. So another common misconception, I think, with climate change is that people sometimes still think we're talking about one day going outside and having our body melted away by the sun. Why is that inaccurate? And what are some of the real threats of a continued increase in global average temperature?
Well, the most important result of climate change is changes in habitat. Several years ago, I was in Winnipeg, Canada, and for the entire week or 10 days that I was there, the temperature in Winnipeg, Canada was colder than it is on Mars for that whole week. That's very cold, but we survived. If that condition were to remain, however, if those freezing conditions would be sustained for more than a few days, maybe more than a few weeks, that would be a whole different picture. The organisms on this planet, and especially the plant life, is not adapted to that rate of change between here and there, and also for those kinds of conditions. The most important result of climate change is changes in habitat for our species and the many others on which we rely for our continued existence. We occupy a planet that is rapidly changing as a result of human actions. According to renowned Australian professor Andrew Glickson in his book, The Event Horizon, released October 9th, 2020, quote, during the Anthropocene, greenhouse gas forcing has risen by more than 2.0 watts per meter squared, equivalent to more than 2 degrees C above pre-industrial temperatures, which constitutes an abrupt event over a period not much longer than a lifetime, end quote. This is the very definition of abrupt climate change, with an attendant rate of environmental change faster than anything this planet has witnessed since being hit by an interstellar object about 66 million years ago. That event led to the demise of the dinosaurs and, paradoxically, to the rise of mammals, including the lineage that ultimately led to Homo sapiens. So really, it's all about the rate of change, and we are undergoing a very rapid rate of change to which very few organisms will be able to adapt. And because we depend upon so many other organisms for our own survival, that's what poses the serious risk to us.
Right. So why is it that people think this rate of change is slow enough where we always have until one generation after we're dead, or around 2100 is the year I always hear? Why is it clear that we have much less time than this?
I think there's a couple of reasons. One, we are evolutionarily poorly created, designed. We have evolved in a way that does not make us accept rapid change. We predict the near future based on the recent past. And throughout our history as an organism, up until the last few years, the recent past has been characterized by gradual change. And so we can reliably predict the near future will also be subject to a relatively slow rate of change. That said, the corporate media has a lot to do with the information most of us receive. Corporate media outlets make no money by pointing out the facts. Imagine all government officials and media outlets telling everybody that they will soon be dead. All those soon-to-be dead people would start focusing on their relationships rather than on dutifully working at their jobs. They would do what they love to do instead of slaving away at jobs they despise. As a result of the money that flows up to the truly wealthy people would stop flowing. In short, there's no money for the wealthy in telling the full truth or in having any of us understand the full factual basis for the situation that we're in.
Right. Yes. Unfortunately, people they prioritize finance and control still, and not survival, really, of our entire species.
Absolutely. And so far, at least for the last few thousand years, privilege has been directly tied to the amount of fiat currency, the amount of money that people make. And so that makes most of us fall in love with money. We think that's the most important thing because that's what provides our comfort and our continuing comforts into the future. That's a tragedy, as you point out.
Sure. So what we're really talking about here to look forward to for our species that we have to be aware of is food shortage. So I guess the next question here is a worldwide famine due to, you talk about grain shortage a lot and the biology of that, triggered by no ice on the North Pole, is that the most likely beginning of imminent human extinction?
Yeah, I think so. Loss of habitat for humans has already begun. A paper published by Colin Raymond and colleagues in the peer-reviewed journal Science Advances on May 8th, 2020, indicates lethal wet bulb temperatures have been surpassed in tropical and subtropical locations around the world. In other words, the lethal wet bulb temperature is the combination or the heat stress associated with high temperatures and high humidities. So you can imagine in tropical and subtropical locations, people are already dying as a result of those high wet bulb, uncomfortable temperatures. And there's very little escape. You just can't blow a fan on your body and cool it down in that situation. Within 6 hours or so, the organs fail. I lived in Central America in Belize for about 2.5 years, and I worked side by side with people who had been working in that kind of environment for their entire lives. But just in the relatively short period I was there was a noticeable increase in wet bulb temperatures that caused people to start practicing poor judgment. Lifelong carpenters, for example, suddenly couldn't hit a nail. People who normally were very coordinated and talented suddenly couldn't walk across the floor. They were losing their ability to function in what we call a normal fashion. So it's already happening in tropical and subtropical regions. In fact, according to the peer-reviewed journal, The Lancet Planetary Health, in a paper published in its July 2021 issue, more than 5 million deaths result each year from what they call non-optimal temperatures, almost all as a result of increased temperatures. As with most peer-reviewed papers, I strongly suspect these findings are conservative. That aside, to return to your point about the Arctic Ocean, a quick glance at the evidence indicates that the first ice-free Arctic Ocean since civilizations arose on Earth will quickly heat the planet and therefore destroy the ability to grow, store, and distribute grains at a large scale. Civilizations, including industrial civilization, this one, are characterized by their ability to grow, store, and distribute grains at a large scale. The failure to do so means this version of civilization will fail, which will lead to loss of aerosol masking. The attendant rapid rise in global temperature means the near-term death of our species and perhaps all life on Earth. I doubt any rational person wants this to happen, and certainly not the people who enjoy enormous privilege because the set of living arrangements remains intact. You can include me and probably you in that camp. Let's quickly go through the evidence, if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Please, please.
And I'm going to rely on papers I cited in my July 25th, 2020 paper in Earth and Environmental Science Research and Reviews. So you can go to my website, guymcpherson.com, and find this paper, and I'm going to read from a short segment of that paper. I'm going to leave out the references to the peer-reviewed literature that support virtually every sentence in this short segment. Okay, so I'm going to read straight from it. Loss of albedo, or reflectance, is already occurring as the Arctic ice melts. Arctic sea ice cover has been in decline since the 1950s and probably before. In addition, melting of the Arctic ice during the early melt season triggers large-scale feedbacks, which subsequently amplify summer sea ice anomalies. This process has doubled since the year 2000. Decreasing sea ice cover, not changes in terrestrial snow cover, has been the dominant radiative feedback mechanism during the last few decades. In other words, that's what's primarily responsible for the albedo or the reflectance. Furthermore, a 2020 simulation result provides support for a fast retreat of Arctic summer sea ice in the future. That was just last year. The decline in Arctic sea ice has accelerated during the few decades of measurement. We've only been keeping measurements since 1979. So, for example, 1/3 of the ice cover within the Arctic Ocean was comprised of very old ice, which is any ice older than 4 years old, at the end of the winter maximum extent in March of 1985. So March of 1985, 1/3 of the ice cover was comprised of this very old ice. In contrast, old ice constituted only 1.2% of the ice extent in March of 2019, and first-year ice now dominates the sea ice cover. In summary, the Arctic sea ice cover has transformed from an older, thicker, and stronger ice mass in the 1980s and before to a younger, thinner, more fragile ice mass in recent years. And that's a cause for major concern for anybody who cares about habitat for our species on this planet.
Yes, yes, it is. To talk about, you're talking about just temperature there. I mean, this is something that people, they can just observe really. I live in Ohio, and I've noticed like during the summer when I was a kid, it would be considered pretty hot to be 75 degrees Fahrenheit. That'd be about the average. And then you'd have a few days of 80, maybe one or two, it goes up to 90. And now it's like 80 degrees every single day, all the way through September. Multiple weeks of 90-degree weather. I mean, this is something happening that we can just observe, yet people still are just denying it or thinking it's just something random with the season or just some natural change, nothing to do with human activity.
Yeah, why would they not? I want to deny it myself. My entire life, my entire adult life anyway, I've been looking at evidence and trying to find holes in the arguments people have been giving, but I can't find any holes. And that's a cause for real concern, because like pretty much everybody else, I don't want to die. I don't want this set of living arrangements to go away. I'm rather enjoying myself. I live in a small apartment, and I look forward to at some point maybe living in a house again. And that's amazing. When you look at the history of humanity and the privilege we have relative to the billions of people who have gone before us, this is a great deal.
Right.
You and I don't want this to go away. And so it's not as if we're cheering for the set of living arrangements to disappear.
Absolutely. So some of the other outcomes of these changes, we're looking at sea level rise, mega storms, droughts, massive migration already happening. Can you explain? I mean, these things are already happening. They're not just something that we need to expect. Can you describe or maybe go through some of the science of why these things are happening?
Yeah, and at the same time, I'll talk a little bit about the propensity for people to deny what's going on. In fact, I too would like to believe every obvious outcome of abrupt climate change will serve to convince people that abrupt climate change is already reducing our ability to persist on Earth. I would like for people to believe that, because I think it's happening all over the place, and as you pointed out, on a very frequent basis. On the other hand, I thought Hurricane Katrina would do the trick. That was 16 years ago. And it seems the ravaging of New Orleans didn't move the needle one bit. Media outlets and governments have spent generations benefiting from creating and promulgating distractions, utter distractions that have very little to do with the important aspects of our lives, including retention of habitat for our species. These distractions and the general focus on everything that doesn't matter have led to a populace with attention spans shorter than goldfish. And that's actually supported in peer-reviewed literature, and very little empathy. It should come as no surprise that Joe and Jill Sixpack are ignorant and uncaring about essentially everything except their own privilege. And so I think that's what led us to this point. I think it's a tragedy, obviously. And I don't see many ways out other than continuing to try to educate people and hope something sinks in. As you indicated, if you have a half a brain, you can see what's going on. You're growing up in Idaho, in Ohio. I grew up in Idaho, not you.
Right.
And you can see what's going on. And I can see what's going on around me as well. I lived in Belize in Central America just for a little over 2 years. And in that relatively short period of time, talking to people who had lived there for 25 years and also seeing what was going on, it was obvious that great changes were underway and had been for at least 25 years. And yet, people are amazing in their ability to deny the obvious. And I suspect that will continue until the last person draws their last breath, which, as with COVID-19, probably will be something like, no, climate change isn't real.
Right. Yeah, people are living in their own private Idaho during that stepping in. So another thing I think that's important to talk about is just something absolutely outrageous. I don't think the media is covering this enough, is these wildfires that are happening. I mean, we recently had just billions of animals displaced or killed or harmed in Australia last year. And then California, most of the West Coast is still on fire. what is with the media and their coverage of this? And why do you think most people don't realize what's happening because of just the wildfires alone?
My brother was a practicing journalist, and then he became a professor of mass communications. And he described to me what goes on in the media. And he was part of that media. And he pointed out that the media, no matter that 5-10 years in a row, you'll have these catastrophic wildfires. Year 11 in a row comes up and the media acts like the fires are brand new, like we've never seen a fire before. There's essentially no context provided for the corporate media and the stories they tell. And you know, that sort of makes sense when you realize they're in the business of making money, not of promulgating reliable information. They're in the business of making money. There's relatively few media outlets in the world, and they all seem to be afflicted by this idea that money is more important than the information they present. It sort of makes sense when you take a step back and think about how important money is in this culture to almost everybody in this culture. It's tragic as far as I'm concerned. And although the internet has allowed for the development of some non-mainstream media outlets, some that aren't nearly so focused on the corporate agenda as they are on getting out the actual evidence. It's a long way from here to overcoming Fox News and all the others. It's a tough battle. I just don't see it happening. And we all do what we can, right? And we try to pick apart the information that's presented to us. But even then, we fall for the nonsense on a far too regular basis. All of us, myself included.
Right. And you know, it's the new era of the internet and technology. We've got to become the media. And you know, that's what this call is about, really. And I know you've been very active on the internet, so I appreciate that. A lot of more people are learning about this than would if it weren't for, you know, people like us at least getting together and making something to put out there to contrast the mainstream media.
Right. You know, in the West, in the Western United States, we're in the midst of a mega drought, the kind of thing that hasn't happened for about 1,000 years, and which, when it last happened, caused the destruction of civilizations such as the Mimbres and the Olmec. And, you know, these were civilizations that had been around for a few thousand years. And then the climate changed because of the mega drought, no longer able to grow grains at scale, and it all heads south. So it's not as if we don't have historical precedents and decent descriptions of what happened in the past. We have a good idea about what has happened, and that should, in an ideal world, serve as an indication of where we're headed now, and maybe encourage people to get some grasp of what the hell's going on in the world. But this is Earth, and we're mortal humans. What are you going to do?
Right. So the next question is pretty serious. You talk a lot about the nuclear power plants and what's going to happen there. What are the implications for nuclear power facilities if there are no people to run them?
Yeah, I produced a video on this topic and included the evidence, the links to the papers that I was quoting. And you can find it at guymcpherson.com and look for a post on June 29th, 2021. So just a few months ago, called Means of Extinction, Nuclear Facilities Implode. The short version of the story is that the uncontrolled meltdown of the world's many nuclear facilities, in the neighborhood of 460 of these facilities, will cause the atmospheric ozone to be stripped away. This ozone in the upper atmosphere protects us from sunburn and skin cancer. When it's gone, habitat for our species and probably most other life on Earth will disappear very quickly. And this stripping away of the ozone in the atmosphere is something that even Ronald Reagan was worried about when it was happening over Antarctica. He was pretty unconcerned, interestingly enough, until it was pointed out to him that the the growth on his nose resulted from sunburn,
Right.
and that loss of ozone in the atmosphere is what contributed to that disease. And so he required a minor surgical operation to take care of it. And then suddenly he was interested in ozone over Antarctica. And as a consequence, we have made major changes at the societal level that have caused the ozone layer to stop growing. Probably it was within the last 10 or 12 years that it started shrinking a little bit. It took a long time for it to start shrinking, but we're there now. Unfortunately, what we're dealing with when we talk about abrupt climate change is a much more dire situation than could be addressed with societal changes in the 1980s.
Right. Yep. It seems that people, they need to have the problem at their front door affecting them personally before they do anything about it. There's no preparation or anything like that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it's amazing, really, the kinds of things we are unwilling to do that, at least initially, when you're in a ship and you see an iceberg and it's a long ways away, you only have to make a very minor change in direction before you can scoot around that iceberg. But we've been tacitly avoiding making those changes for generations now, so the iceberg is upon us. You could argue that we already hit it.
Yeah, it's the same thing with the asteroid. If you find the asteroid coming, that's going to hit Earth outwards where it's near Pluto. You can just move it an inch and it won't hit
Right.
us. But
Right.
it's too close now. It's getting, it's near Mars. It's coming into where the moon is.
Right. One of the stories I like to tell is when I was living in Belize in Central America, the ground that I was standing on had previously been underwater in the Gulf of Mexico. But there was that interstellar object that struck the Yucatan Peninsula about 66 million years ago. That impact caused the land underneath the Gulf of Mexico to rise up and form the Maya Mountains where I was living. That event also caused such profound cooling of the planet very rapidly that the dinosaurs went away and the mammals rose up. Mammals became very successful, including our predecessors. And here we are. So there was two reasons I would tell people when we're standing there on the property in Belize. There's two reasons that we're here. One, that impact of that interstellar object caused the mountains to rise up so that we aren't underwater. And two, we're mammals. And our success resulted from that event. So two reasons directly tied to each other, that humans are here and that I was there in that particular place in the mountains.
It's amazing. It's amazing. So next question is focusing in on emissions. What is the significance of methane? Where does it come from? And why is it still overshadowed by carbon dioxide?
Good questions. Methane comes from many sources, ranging from terrestrial permafrost and clathrates beneath the relatively shallow continental shelves in the ocean, to industrial agriculture and the belching and flatulence of livestock. So a wide range of sources. A little bit on clathrates, because probably most people are not familiar with that term. Clathrates are cages of ice around methane molecules in the relatively shallow continental shelves, primarily beneath the Arctic Ocean. And they only need to be warmed up just a little bit before those ice cages break apart, melt apart, and release the methane. Even though methane is more than 100 times more powerful than carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas, I suspect it receives relatively little attention because it was discovered and described as a greenhouse gas much later than CO2. It's very important, as you indicate, and its importance is massively underreported. I think it's tragic. There might be one more reason, although I sort of hate to go here because I'm so frequently called a paranoid conspiracy theorist. It could be that the media realizes there's no real benefit to telling people that methane is an existential threat, right? So if people are going to stop reading the newspaper because they read bad news, well, this is among the cases of bad news that people don't want to read about.
Absolutely. So this is probably a good time to talk about something that very few people still know about, and that's global dimming, or the aerosol masking effect. Can you explain what that is to people who might have no clue, and then maybe some other feedback loops that people haven't heard of?
Yeah, you're right. Aerosol masking is something, I've been studying climate change since the early 1980s. And I discovered a paper by James Hansen and colleagues published in December 2011. I discovered it probably in January 2012. And that was the first I knew about aerosol masking. In fact, I later wrote that this was the first paper on aerosol masking. Then a friend of mine, who happens to be a librarian, discovered that there were more than 24 papers on the topic before that paper. Hansen and colleagues didn't refer to a single one of those previous papers. So that was one of the reasons I was confused. So it seems to be a well-kept secret that at the same time industrial activity produces the greenhouse gases that most of us know about, that trap some of the heat resulting from sunlight striking Earth, industrial activity also produces small particles that prevent sunlight from even reaching the Earth's surface. These particles are called aerosols, and they act as something of an umbrella to keep sunlight from even striking Earth's surface. They prevent the sun's rays from penetrating the atmosphere, and they therefore preclude additional heating beyond that which is already occurring. According to the godfather of climate science, James Hansen, the aerosols fall out of the atmosphere within 5 days. So the resulting rate of change, if we reduce industrial activity, much less stop it outright, is going to be absolutely catastrophic. 5 days before the planet warms quickly as a result of losing their aerosols, that's amazing. As I indicated, more than 24 peer-reviewed papers have been published on this topic. The latest of them indicating Earth will warm an additional 55% when aerosol masking is lost, with an increase in temperature of 133% over land. So we're already at 2 degrees C above the 1750 baseline. An additional 133% over land, which is where essentially all of us live, that's going to be inconvenient. This paper was published in the prestigious Nature Communications on June 15th, 2021, so just a few months ago. Loss of aerosols will take us to more than 3 degrees C above the 1750 baseline very quickly. And because of that rapid rate of change, it's difficult for me to imagine many species keeping up with this rate of environmental change. And I can't imagine humans will be among them. So interestingly, we would love to reduce emissions, especially of carbon dioxide, but in doing so, I don't see a way to reduce emissions and also maintain the aerosols in the atmosphere. Most of them come from burning coal, after all. And so we're in this catch-22 situation. We have to reduce greenhouse gases. And yet, if we do that through reduced industrial activity, we're going to cause those aerosols to fall out, and we're screwed either way.
Yeah, it's sort of like the perfect storm. We're damned if we do, damned if we don't. It's just, people just want to keep saying, let's just reduce carbon dioxide and, we'll be fine.
Well, most people want to say, you reduce carbon dioxide emissions.
Right.
Don't look at me. And I look at paid climate scientists, government officials, people who are in the media are constantly pointing the finger at everybody else. And I was an academic. I know how much industrial activity is associated with organizing an international meeting of Society for Conservation Biology, for example, or Ecological Society of America. These things are a big deal. I don't see a lot of academics saying, we really should stop that.
All right. So the next question is about the journal literature. I've noticed you talk about this a lot. Recently, they've come closer to speaking the full truth about what's happening. Why do you think they're waiting until now?
Well, paid climate scientists generally fall into the same category as media outlets and politicians. They're reluctant to tell the full truth. As I just indicated, when I was on campus, I didn't even know about the aerosol masking effect at that time. And I wanted to keep going to those conferences, to those international meetings, to meet my colleagues and exchange ideas. So paid climate scientists, I suspect, are reluctant to tell the truth. some of them, such as the well-known liar Michael Mann at Pennsylvania State University, overtly lie about the dire nature of our predicament. Mann is particularly interesting because he chose to have a child a few years after he wrote and had published the iconic hockey stick graph in 1998. So even after he knew we were in the midst of abrupt climate change, he decides to have a child. And now he's got one more reason to try to keep things going the way they are, because he's got a teenage child. I suspect all this happens because these folks have a lot of privilege to lose if people understand the full truth, just as with governments and the corporate media. And I suspect people are coming closer to telling the full truth because anybody with half a brain and the ability to observe reality has already noticed that the world is rapidly changing. And you mentioned that already. You know, if you can see it and I can see it, come on, it's happening everywhere. How can you not notice at this point?
Yeah.
I think you can only not notice if you do a lot of this. You know?
Right. Tunnel vision. Yeah, so you bring up a bit of a moral issue there with having children. I agree with you. You know, I have no plans to have a kid. It seems that people who are having children, they're completely ignoring the fact, or they just are ignorant of, you're bringing that child into a sort of a hell world here, and you're sort of destining them to perhaps an early death or at least extreme difficulty. What are your opinions on like the moral predicament of having a child or not?
This is why I'm adamant about getting this message out, because I'm in no position to tell people to have children or not to have children. That's my job. That's not my job. That's not your job. That's not our responsibility to tell people what to do when it comes to procreating, right? Mm-hmm. And I think we all know this, and this is one of those freedoms that I don't think people should be denied of. On the other hand, I think people should know what's coming. I don't think a lot of people would want to have 17 children if they knew that what kind of world we face in the near future. And I suspect that's one of the reasons Professor Michael Mann is really pushing back against me and other whistleblowers or truth tellers when it comes to the full information, because he's terrified. And who wouldn't be? So, you know, like you, I chose not to have children at a young age. I was 19 years old. Back in those days, 1979, I was 19. So Limits to Growth had come out in 1972. People were still reading it on college campuses. You never hear about it these days. I recognized that there were limits to growth, and we were probably going to bump up against them in my lifetime. So I couldn't imagine bringing a child onto the planet. On the other hand, I also understand, because I'm a biologist, the natural push, the built-in evolutionary drive to have children. It's how our species succeeds. It's how every species succeeds. And I live with a woman who has 3 children. You know, if I mocked her every day for having children, this relationship wouldn't go well. It wouldn't last very long. So I understand the evolutionary push for people to have children. It's how every organism succeeds. And so at the individual level, it's hard for me to go around saying, you idiot, you have a child. You idiot, you have a stroller and there's a baby. You know, that just doesn't make any sense. But again, because my motive is to educate people, I think that this conversation is important. I think that people should have some understanding of what lies in the future. Even if I'm wrong by a couple of decades, and I'm not, because everything I present is rooted in the peer-reviewed literature, which is very conservative. Even if that's the case, can the planet handle 10 billion people? I don't think so. We're more than 7.8 billion right now, and things are really unraveling already. It's a tough time to be a human, especially in places that we would consider undeveloped or lesser developed countries. You know, things are still sort of holding together here in the United States because we have the world's largest military, and we're not at all embarrassed to use it. And so we have the kinds of lives right now that pretty much resemble what our parents lived through, even better, because We've all got one of these, right?
Right. So next question here. I think this is probably the most common argument you'll get against this, is that we can't trust this data. It could be completely fabricated, such as the sea ice extent on the North Pole. How do you respond to people who just say the data is fake or you can't trust it?
A couple of things. The evidence that appears in peer-reviewed journals generally goes through a rigorous process involving colleagues, competitors, editors, and peer reviewers. In fact, most of the peer reviewers are actually competitors with the people who are writing the papers. That's why they're asked to review the paper, is because they're doing research in the same arena. So that's why peer-reviewed journal articles are the gold standard for production of reliable knowledge. And I rely almost exclusively on such information. I published in peer-reviewed journals. I've written and spoken about the process now and then. I know that it's a challenging notion to get even a single paper published in the peer-reviewed literature, and I've had dozens. That said, I'm pretty much beyond caring what people think of me and my voluntary work. I'm a scientist. I follow the protocols of science to reach relevant conclusions. Sometimes I'm wrong. Science is like that. But when it comes to extinction of humans and all other life on Earth, my approach has been and remains conservative. Those who don't believe me are still going to die, and much sooner than they believe. I'm trying to help people with the attendant evidence and the ensuing grief. What people believe and what people do is really up to them. And that's why I try to separate the work that I do and the messages that I give. I try to point out that these are recommendations, and I'm pretty sure the world is headed in this direction because the peer-reviewed literature has always been very conservative, and it indicates that we're headed for a dire future. But if you don't want to believe me, what am I going to do? I'm not the guy who can go around arresting people because they don't believe the evidence. So at some point, I reached the conclusion that the ancient Stoics had the right idea: let go or be dragged. I can't attach my mental health to whether people believe me or not. So I just put the information out there. You don't want to believe it? Fine. That's up to you. What am I going to do? Right? I can't, Louis C.K., the famous stand-up comic who ran into the Me Too thing, has this great little 3.5-minute bit called "If Murder Was Legal." And it's hilarious. The world would be a very different place if we were allowed to go around murdering people, especially the ones who are idiots. But murder isn't legal. So we're stuck in this world. All I can do is present the information rooted in evidence and encourage people to read it, listen to it, follow it, whatever. That's it. You can do the same. But if we get too attached to the outcome, that's a prescription for disaster. And here's a case in point. For 21 years on college campuses, I encouraged my students to not have children. I thought it was a bad idea since I was younger than any of them, and I still didn't have any children. And look, I made it work. But then there's that drive of natural selection pushing them to want to have children. And I understand that. I was an abject failure. I know 2 or 3 of my hundreds of students who didn't have children. That's it. I came across one recently she'd been a Facebook friend of mine for years, and I thought she was one of the brightest students I'd ever had in my classrooms. I thought she really got it, and she's got a passel of children. How did that happen?
Wow. Yeah.
And I know how it happened. It's because of that natural selection. It's that drive to push us all to have. I get that, and I'm all about procreating. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I'm all about sex. I'm not about producing the obvious outcome from too many sexual adventures, right? But we have this technology now, right? We have oral contraceptives. Don't tell anybody, but these things actually work wonders. And lots of other means of preventing additional human beings from landing here on Earth. I think that's a great idea to use those things. We have these tools.
Yeah, it's just more of a reason to promote scientific advancement in those areas. And,
Right.
my philosophy on the whole telling truth thing and being misjudged is just, you've got to be content with just being an example. You can't force someone else to change. You just have to analyze it and then output, what you've processed, and just let it be there as an example. And then other people can decide for themselves.
Right. And that's the whole story right there. We have to let other people decide for themselves, just as we were allowed to decide for ourselves. And we thought it was great when it was happening to us. So maybe we should let go a little bit, let other people do that. Because after all, murder isn't legal.
Right. So if people are to accept this as true, um, do you feel that your generation and older generations actually have a debt to pay to mine and younger generations to come after me, due to sort of placing the responsibility of saving this entire planet onto our shoulders?
I think that's a terrible thing that some people have done. The godfather of climate science, James Hansen, including, with a paper he had published in 2017 called Young People's Burden. So he puts the burden on the young people. It's not him. It's not 80-year-old James Hansen who had anything to do with the world being completely screwed up. And even if it is, the youngsters have to fix it now. I think that's terrible. I think we all have a debt to pay. We owe the living planet our lives and our livelihoods. Few people acknowledge their debts. Even fewer are interested in paying it, much less paying it forward, as you suggest. I'm asked nearly every day for advice about living. I recommend living where you feel most alive and simultaneously where you feel most useful. Because at least for me, being useful is really important. That's how joy comes into my life, when I've been useful and somebody affirms for me that I've been useful. I also recommend living fully. This is an idea that has been around for a few thousand years, the idea of living fully, with people like Lao Tzu, with the ancient Stoics in Greece. I recommend living fully. Any moment might be your last. That's one of the lines Homer wrote in the Iliad some 2,800 years ago. I recommend living with intention. I recommend living urgently with death in mind. I recommend the pursuit of excellence. I recommend the pursuit of love. In light of the short time remaining in your life and my own, I recommend all of the above, louder than before, more fully than you can imagine, to the limits of this restrictive culture and beyond. For you, for me, for us, for here, for now. Live large, be you, and bolder than you've ever been. Live as though you're dying. The day draws near. But all that aside, that's just a recommendation. I'm no guru. I don't know a lot more than a whole bunch of other people on the planet, and I've never claimed to be anybody's spiritual leader. So this is just the advice I give. Whether people want to take it or not, I have no control over that.
Yeah, I think that advice applies regardless if we're in near-term extinction scenarios.
I couldn't agree more. And some people have made mistakes with their money because they thought our time was shorter than it turned out to be. And a few of those people I loaned money to. and then they said, well, you said money would be worthless by now, so I'm just not going to pay you back.
Oh, wow.
So I encourage people to live for today, for now, for here and now, but also there's almost certainly a tomorrow. There's almost certainly a next Tuesday. And so we have to hedge our bets a little bit and recognize that in this system that we're in this monetary system, in this culture, and we have to make money too. If we don't make money, then we're going to starve. And nobody likes that. I've never run across a starving individuals who says, man, I love this. I'm going to keep doing this.
Right. You can't eat money. So,
right. As I used to say, you can't eat gold and silver's bitter.
Oh, God, that's a good one. All right. So next question I have is actually something I'm pretty interested in. Very curious. Is it true you've been followed or visited by government agents in your classrooms?
A series of events has happened to me that cannot logically be explained by any other means. So I'm 99% certain that has happened. I'd rather not get into the details here because they distract from my central messages. The messages I'd really like to focus on include how we treat the living planet and how we treat each other. The events of my personal life are of little consequence in comparison. So, whereas I have pretty good evidence at my disposal about being tracked by the deep state on speaking tours and also on campus, dating back to the mid 1990s. When I talk about that, people think I'm a paranoid conspiracy theory freak. So I find that it's just a distraction that doesn't really serve my purpose if I spend too much time on it.
Yeah, I wouldn't even be surprised either way, you know. You're one of the very few people who have your status, you know, as at the University of Arizona. You're very, I mean, there aren't that many people with your credibility who are talking about these things. So I wouldn't even be surprised.
Yeah. And when you look at the degree to which the security surveillance network in the United States has tracked people and has been found guilty of murdering people who were just doing the right thing, then you realize that they're capable of almost anything. You know, the federal government was found guilty in a court of law of murdering Martin Luther King. Most people don't know that. It's one of those well-hidden facts. And if you look on a place like Wikipedia, Wikipedia makes that whole thing sound like it's something I just made up just now. And it's not.
Right. All right. So I think a lot of people listening to this, they're going to think you're saying that we should give up. That's absolutely not your message here. Even though as unlikely as it is for us to avoid near-term extinction, why shouldn't we give up? And why should we still try to help the situation?
Like it or not, we have inadvertently become the most important species in the history of the planet. Only we can cause the extinction of all life on Earth. We can do that one of at least two ways, either by, well, one of three ways. We can maintain industrial activity and therefore continue to overheat the planet, indicating that in the near future, we are headed for a massively overheated planet that will lose habitat for humans all over the world. In addition, we can slow industrial activity, but we already talked about the importance of the aerosol masking effect and the outcome that would leave. And then there's the catastrophic meltdown of the world's nuclear facilities. That would be inconvenient. So in summary, only we can cause the extinction of all life on Earth. That's not the legacy I'd like to leave in our wake. What about you? I don't think so. So we have a lot at stake here, and it's not just our individual lives. It's not just me and you, and it's not just our family and friends. It's all life on Earth. I'm a conservation biologist. I actually love life on Earth. Even the inconvenient things like scorpions and spiders and those nasty things that bite us and cause untoward outcomes. But all that aside, our species has been here on Earth for about 320,000 years with many predecessors before us. Don't we have some sort of obligation to retain habitat for all those species? The kind of habitat that met us when we showed up 320,000 years ago? I think we do. Giving up is not in my vocabulary, and that's why I am really pushing hard for the mere reflection framework I mentioned earlier. I'll mention it again, just because I'm so serious. Merereflection.com, MEER reflection.com. It's really, really important because we are on the brink of losing habitat for our species and therefore all life on Earth. I can't imagine a more important issue than this. Why would we give up? That doesn't make any sense.
Right. So you mentioned the mere reflection system. Can you talk about why geoengineering or just conventional human technology like solar or wind is unreasonable?
I used to think that all geoengineering, including the kind of work that Dr. Tao came up with the mirror reflection framework, was a bad idea. Because, as pointed out in at least 5 peer-reviewed papers by Professor Tim Garrett at the University of Utah, civilization itself is a heat engine, regardless of how it's powered. So, yes, I realize this seems to run counter to my support for the mirror reflection framework. However, the latter framework, the mirror reflection framework, includes significant changes in our lives. It's not just about mirrors reflecting back sunlight. It's also about changes in our lives that will require us to give up some of the privileges associated with industrial civilization. That's one of the reasons why I suspect the mirror reflection framework has received little positive attention from the corporate media and the billionaires who could fund the framework with what's for them pocket change. It's not a tremendous amount of money that would be required to create and use the mirrors at various places around the world that would reflect back the sunlight. It's what comes next. There are other things we have to do if we are to persist on the planet. And that means, at least for some of us, giving up some of the privileges we enjoy, like maybe even talking about Planned Parenthood.
Right,
These are things that we have been talking about for a very long time, but seemingly incapable of taking action, at least at the societal level.
All right. So I think a lot of people think, I'm doing my job. I have an electric car. I check my tire pressure every week. Everything's fine with me. I'm not going to be to blame for this. Why is the modern surge of electric cars ineffective, especially when they're being plugged into the grid still?
Yeah, well, item 1, which I already brought up, as pointed out in at least 5 peer-reviewed papers by Professor Tim Garrett at the University of Utah, civilization is a heat engine regardless how it is powered. But in addition to that, the electrical grid is powered almost exclusively by fossil fuels, and coal is a big driver of the electrical grid in the United States. Those electric cars, which consume enormous quantities of finite materials, are largely powered by coal. And coal is something that most people understand correctly to be a dominant contributor of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. So, it looks like on the surface you're doing the right thing, but those electric cars were not made by the electric car fairy,
Right.
or whatever you want to call Elon Musk. He's not the electric car fairy. They didn't just show up. There's a lot of coltan in there, and there's a lot of coltan in our cell phones, and there's consequences. The Congo is seeing lots and lots of women and children die because they're mining coltan. I don't think any of us want to be responsible for the outcome of having a cell phone. And yet, the cell phone has become the go-to source, the way we communicate in the world. It's a complicated world.
Yeah, I often say Elon Musk should change his company name from Tesla to Edison. I think it'd be more appropriate.
Right, yes.
But shifting gears here, just a few more questions I have. I'm someone who's working towards anarchy in the real definition of the word, being without rulers, helping people acquire self-ownership. How did you become an anarchist, and did anyone in particular influence you in that way?
As with most of the important decisions in my life, my route to anarchism happened pretty slowly, pretty gradually. I started reading Edward Abbey, the American writer Edward Abbey, who lived most of his adult life in Tucson, Arizona. Started reading him when I was in my college years and read him all through graduate school. And he was particularly influential for me. He's sometimes called the desert anarchist because he spent all that time in the Sonoran Desert promoting the idea of anarchism as we understand it. As you pointed out, some people mistake anarchism for chaos. And I point out to people that chaos is a system without rules. Anarchism is a system without rulers. It's a huge difference that most people don't understand.
Absolutely.
And I recognize, at this late date in human history with 7.8 billion people on the planet, that it's a little late to implement anarchism, that we can't expect people to form tribes and start taking care of themselves at this point, because 8 billion people, the 300 and some million in the United States alone, we have reached the point that, as much as I hate to say it, government is necessary to ensure certain things happen with respect to justice. But what an ugly trade-off. What a way to get here.
Yeah, that's a long argument too. The whole
Yeah,
government
absolutely.
versus no government thing. That's like a whole other conversation.
Right.
But yeah, people are just they're used to having someone to look up to lead them and to tell them what to do and to obey them. And I think that's really the source of the problem.
Absolutely. We love hierarchy. We grew up in hierarchy. Dad was the patriarch, right? In most families. Sometimes it's mom. But we grew up with this person making decisions for us. And it worked out great because we all survived so far. Occasionally, we even got a Twinkie or a bowl of ice cream out of the deal. So it's no big step to go from there to the corporate world where most people work, to the educational system where everybody goes to school. It's all top down. It's all patriarchal. So that's what we understand, and that's what we expect, at least for most of us. To argue against that system, you will meet some serious resistance. At least I have. And I'm a huge fan of anarchism, but getting there is going to be quite the trick.
Yeah, it's almost going to take a miracle at this point. But
I'm a fan. I don't believe in miracles, but I want a whole bunch of them.
Right, you got to at least be open to it. So seeing as this show is called Psyclonic, and that our country, the USA, has been hit by many record-breaking hurricanes the past few years, how are these storms getting bigger, and what is their relationship to sea surface temperature increase and changes in salinity?
Well, as assured by the laws of thermodynamics, Earth is constantly in the midst of rebalancing energy. Hurricanes release energy from an overheated ocean into the atmosphere. As a result of this transfer of energy, the atmosphere and the terrestrial parts of the planet become warmer. The overheated ocean becomes slightly cooler, and it becomes saltier because, after all, the hurricanes are transferring water from the ocean to the land via rain, but in doing so, the rain is desalinated. In short, it's pretty much distilled because the water that evaporates out of the ocean leaves the salt behind. So it's all about energy rebalancing, and the laws of thermodynamics indicate that that will always be happening. And the planet has a lot going on. We've overheated it profoundly within the last 100 years, and most notably within the last 25 years. And that has consequences. We have especially overheated the ocean. And now, because of that attempted rebalancing, as if the Earth is sentient, the laws of thermodynamics assure that the seeking of equilibrium will continue. So the laws of thermodynamics demand that the overheated ocean contribute some of that heat to the land and to the atmosphere. And because we've overheated, and it was an overheated ocean that in September 2019, the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, finally concluded climate change was irreversible. That's in their special report on the oceans and cryosphere. And so that's a huge factor. So much of the mass of Earth is water, and that water has a specific heat and a specific gravity that allows it to hold heat, but then it releases it, especially during El Nino Southern Oscillation events. And that allows for a rebalancing of that energy mix. And I suspect that's not going to be working in our future in the near term, because we have overheated the whole system to such a great degree.
Okay, so I think the best question to end this on is, why is the planet itself actually in no danger, rather just the life on it, and particularly our species?
Yeah, just the life. As you know, there are plenty of planets in the universe, and in fact, in the multiverse. Most of them are lifeless rocks. Earth will soon join those lifeless rocks as just another lifeless planet. I'm not happy about this, but I have little control over the situation. Sometimes it's better to let go than to be dragged. And I suspect this is one of those times. Try as I might to educate people and tell them, warn them about what's coming and how they might change their lives in light of that information. I think we're headed for a lifeless rock in the not too distant future. And I'm not happy about that, especially on behalf of your generation, which is a generation younger than mine. And I know that I contributed to the horrific situation that you face. Try as I might otherwise. On the other hand, we were all born into this set of living arrangements. As my friend Tim Bennett likes to say, we were born into captivity. The captivity of civilization, of attempting to meet the expectations of others. And that's what really matters to us. And that's tragic, because when you're born into this set of living arrangements, there's a certain set of expectations. And if you try to choose a contrary path, you get the evil eye. You get the, what the hell is that guy doing anyway? He's not doing what everybody else is doing. There must be something wrong. That's terrible, but it's the way it is. So as I go through my days and my weeks and my months, I try simultaneously to inform people about what's coming, to get people interested in the mere reflection framework. Dare I mention again, MEER, reflection.com, and try to turn this ship around before it's truly too late. And maybe it's too late already. And so I try to accept that and not go around shaming and blaming people for it, because I'm the person I would be pointing the fingers at. My generation is the one that contributed to this overheating to a greater extent than any other generation. But on the other hand, I was born into this just like everybody else. So I'm conflicted. As they say on Facebook, it's complicated.
Oh, yeah. So just to be clear, we're talking about like cosmic scales of time here. Like how much time do you think it'll be before Earth regenerates life, maybe anywhere near our level of complexity?
I think never.
Never.
I really think so. You know, there's a couple of factors that contribute here. We're on the verge of an ice-free Arctic. An ice-free Arctic was projected to occur in the annual review of Earth and Planetary Sciences in 2012 with an article titled "The Future of Arctic Sea Ice." It was written by Maslovsky and colleagues. And it projected an ice-free Arctic in 2016, plus or minus 3 years. So the last possible year that was, quote, supposed to happen through this linear projection was in 2019. Well, here we are, it's 2021, and we escaped one this year, and we escaped one last year, 2020, and all 7 of those years between 2016 plus or minus 3 years. So I think we're on the verge. James Anderson, the Harvard atmospheric scientist famous for discovering the link between chlorofluorocarbons and the Antarctic ozone hole, said after he gave a presentation in Chicago, this was published in Forbes, you can find it online on Forbes on January 15th, 2018. So it goes back about 3.5 years now. He said, quote, "The chance there will be permanent ice in the Arctic after 2022 is essentially zero." That first ice-free Arctic in the history of the planet since civilizations arose is going to be a very big deal. The rapid rate of change after that, I suspect, will be something that few, if any, species survive. In fact, there was a paper in Scientific Reports published November 13th, 2018 by Giovanni and Bradshaw, indicating that that rate of change alone will be sufficient to cause the loss of all life on Earth. Never mind the meltdown of the nuclear power plants and the stripping away of the atmospheric ozone in the aftermath. So there's a couple of ways that we can cause extinction, and it seems like we're trying as hard as we can, much as I'd like to think otherwise. So it looks like our time is short, and it looks like that will involve all life on Earth. But I'm not going to give up. specifically because we're talking about all life on Earth. It's not about me. It's not about the children and the grandchildren I never had. It's not about my family and my friends. It's about all life on Earth. How could we not be concerned about that? So this is my mission. And so far I've failed. But as with anybody who's an idealist, I think positive change is right around the corner. George Carlin used to say, scratch any cynic and you'll uncover a disappointed idealist. And that's me. I become too cynical sometimes because I'm an idealist, because I think we can make the changes that are necessary to save life on Earth. And then I look around. Whew, how stupid could I be?
Yeah, I'm certainly not giving up either. I think people should pursue a life of fulfillment. I think they should follow their dreams. Do the best you can with the limited time we have. That's really the best advice that either of us could give, I feel.
Absolutely. You know, life is short. No matter how long you live, life is short. When I was touring Western Europe 6.5 years ago now, the world's oldest human being was, I think she was 117 years old. And on the occasion of her 117th birthday, somebody asked her, what do you think? Can you ponder those first 117 years of your life so far? And she said, it seemed rather short. She's 117 years old. Are you kidding me? You and I, Jack, are not going to make it to 117 years old. I promise it will seem rather short. And then to put a punctuation mark on her message, she died a few weeks later. It seemed rather short. So live it, man. This is it. You got one shot at this thing we call life. Grab it. Do those things you need to do. Go those places you have to go. Scratch those items off your bucket list while maintaining your integrity, while not purposely hurting people along the way. I can imagine no better a life than that.
Yep, we've got to admit our limitations and just still pursue whatever is out there for us, as individuals on the journey of life.
Right.
Well, thank you, Guy. I think I've taken enough of your time. I really appreciate you joining me for this call. Is there anything you'd like to say in terms of where listeners could find you or what you're currently working on?
You can find all my work at guymcpherson.com. If there's a search box there. So if you want to look up the aerosol masking effect, for example, or the mirror reflection project, you can put that in the search box in case you haven't been taking good notes throughout this conversation. And, I encourage people to live their lives as fully as they possibly can, with death over their left shoulder, knowing that our time is short, but more importantly, living with integrity and trying to make the world a better place for future generations. If we can all do that, we're going to be fine. Maybe. That's the best I can wish for in any event. Thank you for the opportunity. This has been a very good and meaningful conversation. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a good day. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.